everyone. Welcome. I'm Rachel Siegel, the Director of Jewish Women's Leadership Programs at Illuminate. Welcome to our Crown Jewel Conversation series. Illuminate empowers Jewish feminist women leaders and philanthropists, advancing gender equity and social justice. We have created the Collective, our signature leadership advancement program to train, support, elevate, and connect Jewish women's leadership globally to achieve the social change we seek. Illuminate invests in women's leadership, in Jewish entrepreneurial women executives and leaders who are devoting their lives to tackling society's most pressing issues throughout the United States, Israel, and around the world. Each year, we select 10 women to be in the Collective's cohort-based leadership advancement program. Our global network is now 60 women strong. Our conversation today features one of our incredible Collective members. Jamie Beck is the founder of J.D. Beck Consulting, specializing in supporting attorneys, law firms, and organizations working with survivors of human trafficking and domestic violence. Previously, Jamie served as the president and managing attorney of Free to Thrive, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing justice and transforming the legal system for human trafficking survivors. She is also an adjunct lecturer in law at USC Gould School of Law and Pepperdine Caruso School of Law, where she teaches trauma-informed legal skills. Jamie's professional background includes practicing civil litigation at San Diego's largest law firm and serving as a judicial law clerk in the Federal District Court for the Southern District of California. Please write any questions that you have in the chat, and we will do our best to incorporate them if time allows. To begin the conversation, I'm pleased to introduce the immediate past president of Illuminate, Rachel Weinstein.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome everyone. So happy to see you. You know, it feels sort of fitting that this is our topic as we lead into Passover, right? I mean, human trafficking is a form of slavery. And so I'm so happy to be having this conversation with you now, Jamie, and welcome. I know that we have a lot of ground to cover, and you've had a lot going on in the last couple months, which we're going to share with everyone. But before we get into that, let's just talk a little bit about you. How did you start in this work? You know, how did this issue become the one that's your life's passion? Tell us about you.
Well, good morning, Rachel and everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thrilled to join you all today. So how do I make a long story not so long? So as was mentioned, I worked in private practice, and while I was in private practice, I got really involved in the issue of human trafficking. And, you know, it actually started that I attended a training, like not so different than, you know, today's not like a formal training, but, you know, an opportunity to learn about human trafficking. And I attended this training for lawyers in the legal community in San Diego. And at that training, they talked a lot about human trafficking and how it's impacting the San Diego community. And it was all information that I did not know, wasn't aware of. And it became very clear that there was an unmet need in San Diego for legal services for survivors. There was two prosecutors who were speakers, and they said, you know, as a prosecutor, the victims are not our clients. Our client is, you know, the people, right? And they have all these legal needs, particularly civil legal needs that are, you know, we can't help them with. And there's really nobody in San Diego doing that work. And so that really sparked my interest. And so I started kind of a long journey. I started a group within our Feminist Bar Association aimed at engaging the legal community around human trafficking. And we had, through that group, we had a mentorship program. We had trainings for lawyers to engage in pro bono work. And then we also engaged in policy advocacy. And all those things kind of just beautifully collided in my life in a way that led me to start Free to Thrive. In that, through the mentorship program, I met this amazing survivor who I call Sarah. She was born and raised in San Diego. She was trafficked when she was 16 years old. And when I met her, she was 21 years old and living at a safe house. And was really just starting her recovery and healing process from her experiences. And sometime after I met her, I got a call from the executive director of the safe house saying, one of our girls has been arrested. Can you help? And like, I'm a civil lawyer. I know nothing about criminal law. And there was something I mean, I probably would have helped no matter what, but like there's something inside of me that I knew that it was her. And I said, is it Sarah? And she said, it is. And I said, no problem. I'll see what I can do. So I walked down the hall to a colleague of mine who was a former federal prosecutor who also had no state criminal law experience, but he at least knew criminal law in general. And I said, hey, there's this survivor who needs our help. Can you help? And he said, absolutely, I'd be happy to. So then the firm said we could help her. We helped her with her case. It was what had happened was she had an arrest from when she was being trafficked, and she did not come to court because she was being trafficked. And so there's a warrant out for her arrest. And so she went to court thinking that she would, she had court dates and she knew she needed to do something, and didn't understand that if you don't show up for a court date, there's a warrant. So she was taken into custody and put in jail because of that. And we ended up helping her through her case. It was a case that was a drug case, and she was forced to take drugs by her trafficker. And so we helped her through drug court. And basically, with drug court, the end of drug court is you get an expungement. So we finish her case and we're like, great, your record's been expunged. And, so glad we could help you. Well, fast forward, she graduates from this program. She had gotten her GED while she was there. She went off to college out of state, and she calls me up and she's like, Jamie, I can't get a job because of my criminal record. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, we expunged your record. And what I didn't know at the time was that in California, and probably most places, if you have a criminal record that's expunged and somebody runs your background, it still shows up. So the entire idea behind an expungement actually isn't the reality of what people experience. It shows up as dismissed, which I, as a lawyer, did not know that means expunged. And you can still see what the charges are. And her record had theft and drug charges. And so being a 20-something-year-old trying to get a job anywhere, retail, restaurants, no one would hire her because of her record. And so I said, there's nothing within the law that I can do to help you. And it was right around that time that through our education training program, we learned that other states, including New York, had and have laws that allow survivors of trafficking to completely clear their records. The term is called vacatur, and it's broader than an expungement. It actually is like a big eraser where everything is completely cleared from your record, with the concept being that, if you're a victim of trafficking who was forced to commit crimes while you're being trafficked, you should not suffer the consequences of that criminal record for the rest of your life. And so we learned about those. And then through our policy work, we advocated for a vacatur law in California. And this was in 2015. We held a legislative roundtable. We invited local electeds to come, and this was our kind of key piece of legislation that we were advocating for. At that event, one of our state senators got up and said, I would like to do a vacatur law. Let me know what I can do to help. And the same day, I started working on a bill with his staff. Fast forward 1 year later, we have a law in place. I thought it was very easy to pass laws in California. Little did I know that this was just kind of some magical moment. That's not actually how it works the rest of the time. And we had this law, and by this time I had been doing anti-trafficking work for quite a while and knew that this is what I was meant to do. And so I quit my job and I started this nonprofit called Free to Thrive. And I called Sarah up and I said, we passed this law. I would love to take your case. I don't know anything about it. I've never done this before, nor has anybody else in California. So we're going to have to learn alongside one another. But if you're willing to be patient with me, I would like to represent you, and you will be one of the first survivors in California to get your record vacated. And so we worked on her case, and right around Christmas time the next year, she had a clean criminal record.
It's just so amazing. And I mean, I'm so proud for you, but you should feel so proud. I mean, like, that's real meaningful change, both on a micro and a macro level, like where you can see that like you worked on a law that is like dramatically changing people's lives and people who need it so much. I want to talk about Free to Thrive, but before we do that, I just want to ask you, is Sarah demographically representative of the survivors that you've been working with? Like, tell us a little bit about who
Yeah.
these people are.
Yeah, yes and no. In terms of the age that she was trafficked, yes, she was 16 years old, which is, I think the average, like, first of all, just data around human trafficking is really like, it's very, very hard to measure. So we kind of have to take it all with a grain of salt. But in terms of the clients that I've served, many were trafficked as teenagers. So she was kind of in that age range and then got out of trafficking. 21 is a little bit young. A lot of my clients were trafficked into their mid to late 20s or even later in life. She, what really was different is that she had a very strong support system, which I have other clients, but like most of my clients, a third were former foster youth. Many came from really traumatic childhoods and really disadvantaged backgrounds and impoverished communities. She didn't have any of that. She grew up in a two-parent home. She had a very strong relationship with her family. Her trafficker used that against her and basically said, if you ever tell your family what's happening to you, um, I will hurt, they'll be harmed. And so she was too scared. She actually was in contact with her family, most of the time she was being trafficked, and they had no idea because she was, trying to protect them. She's Caucasian, which um, I would say maybe like a third of our clients were Caucasian, maybe a little bit less. The rest were African American, Latino, or multiple races. So yes and no.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So you founded Free to Thrive in 2016. So tell us a little bit about what was specifically the mission of the organization and like what was your work? I mean, it sounds like advocacy was piece of it, but tell us specifically.
Yeah, and it shifted over time as we kind of evolved as an organization. Initially, it was holistic wraparound legal services for trafficking survivors, and over time, it really evolved to focus on vacature, policy work, and education. And the education was really around educating the legal community, not just about human trafficking, but about the criminalization of survivors. It's something that I think there is now a lot more education around the issue of trafficking, but the piece that's often left out, and really, like, I'm one of the few people in the country who talks about this, is that 90% of sex trafficking victims have a criminal record that is related to their exploitation. So we're talking about almost all victims of sex trafficking. Labor trafficking is different. Labor trafficking is actually far more prevalent, but most of my clients were victims of sex trafficking or sex and labor trafficking. But we're talking about almost everybody is being arrested for crimes, and most often it's not prostitution. Like it is sometimes, but it's drugs, it's theft, it's welfare fraud, it's all kinds of other things that are always tied to their trafficking. But it's like you have to know something about human trafficking to understand what's really happening. And so it was really important to educate prosecutors and defense attorneys and judges about this issue because ideally we would like to reduce, not just help them with their record after the fact, but actually help them, reduce the risk that would happen to them. And so, and then we also saw so many issues with the law that we were working with that we did a lot of policy work around expanding and improving the laws impacting survivors. And among that work, one of the key pieces of legislation, we actually had 3 different bills that amended the vacature law. One helped specifically with respect to immigrant survivors change the language that would reduce the chances that they would be deported because of the crimes that were vacated. And then one piece was kind of just like a kind of a wonky cleanup bill, we called it. And then the third one was a really expansive piece of legislation that not only did it expand the vacature law to victims of domestic violence and sexual violence, it also expanded another piece of legislation that's a defense. It expanded the defense to victims of same population domestic violence and sexual violence. And then it added other areas within the law that made it relevant. If somebody is a victim of these crimes, that in their criminal prosecution, it made it relevant in a case at plea bargaining, sentencing, and also gave them the opportunity to be resentenced. So a really robust piece of legislation. We passed it in 2021. And that was a moment, I think one of the few moments that we could pass a law like that because, post George Floyd, there was this huge push for criminal justice reform. And that's really what this was. I don't know that we could pass that law today, because the pendulum has really swung in the other direction, unfortunately. And we could talk more about that later, but
We
yeah.
can, yeah, for sure. And just because you mentioned them, you mentioned immigrants. I mean, what percentage of the clients that you're working with are American citizens, which are not? You know, like, is it 50-50?
Mhm.
Is it?
Surprisingly, no. Almost all of my clients, even in San Diego, a border city, a lot of people assume that most of my clients would be from other countries. Like 98% of our clients at Free to Thrive were born in the US. When we talk about labor trafficking, it's a lot, I mean, predominantly non-citizens, but not exclusively. But when we talk about sex trafficking, and not just in San Diego, like the national data is like 80% of sex trafficking victims in the US are born in the US. So this is really a domestic crime that people assume it's like, oh, it's people from other countries that are brought here, and held against their will. That's just not how it works. And also it's often conflated with human smuggling, where like bringing somebody illegally into the country is a crime and it's called human smuggling. And human trafficking is exploiting somebody for purposes of sex or labor, which is a completely different crime.
Yeah, it feels like there needs to be like a whole huge education campaign around there because the amount of
Yeah.
misconception is really astounding.
Mhm.
And just also just to re-clarify, the work you're doing is solely and primarily with the survivors. You are not going after the traffickers themselves. Like
Mhm.
that's the DA's
Yeah,
office or okay.
exactly. Yeah.
So you founded this organization in 2016 and like not even 5 years in, you're still like a startup basically, and the pandemic hits.
Yeah.
So how did the pandemic impact your work and also this issue?
It was a really challenging time for anybody to run a nonprofit. It was definitely challenging on so many levels. There was so much uncertainty, things that we didn't, we had to completely change how we deliver our services, which we were a very scrappy, nimble nonprofit, and that really worked to our advantage. But we went from being a community-based organization where we'd meet with clients throughout the community at safe houses, in libraries, like anywhere that they were able to meet with us, to being fully remote and actually stayed that way. After that, because it ended up being just far more efficient and allowed us to serve survivors, not just in San Diego, but all over the country. If they had a legal need in San Diego, we would serve them. And but really what changed was the issue of human trafficking in the from, I would say, maybe 2000, like my time was like 2013 is when I got involved in the anti-trafficking movement, but I'd say maybe like 2010 all the way up through the pandemic. It was a really hot button issue. Everybody was talking about it. There was research being done. It was on the news. Like it was just kind of all over the place. And then during the pandemic, it just became, it went as to the back seat, because there's so many issues. I mean, if you think about all the different issues impacting our society, um, it's something that if you are not directly impacted, you're very unlikely to know about it or even care about it. It's like, it's happening all around us in every community. I guarantee everywhere, every person on this Zoom lives, there is human trafficking happening in your community, suburbs, rural areas, cities. It's everywhere, but you don't see it, you don't know it's happening. And there's just yes, New York State, every part of New York, I guarantee there's human trafficking happening.
Yeah.
Um, and it kind of, people weren't really paying attention to it, which made it extremely hard to fundraise. And really, especially, we worked on kind of a niche within human trafficking, which is criminalized survivors, really was our focus in that at that by that point. And there's a lot of education that you have to do to help people understand why they should even care about this population. I think when they understand, like even the things that we've already talked about, it's very, very compelling. It's an incredible injustice for survivors that they have to carry these criminal records for the rest of their lives. But it's a complex issue. And so we were able to, and at this point we'd grown quite large staff-wise. We had grown to a staff of 15 people, and we expanded during the pandemic because the need was greater than ever. It's not like it stopped happening because we were in the middle of a pandemic. People were still being trafficked, and actually vulnerability for youth increased. We saw a huge uptick in youth exploitation online because kids were had kind of unfettered access to the internet, and parents were distracted. And so it made kids extremely vulnerable, especially kids who maybe were already in like abusive or neglectful homes. It made it very easy for people to prey upon them and exploit them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember when, I don't know, there were Super Bowls where actually there was there
Mhm.
were a lot of
Yep.
campaigns around the Super Bowls for this. I mean, and it all
Mhm.
seems to have disappeared. And we didn't talk about this in advance, but I'm sort of wondering, do you think also the population that this affects, being largely women, impacts
Yeah.
the level of attention that this issue is getting
Mhm.
nationally or
Absolutely.
at state level? Yeah.
Yeah. Women, and particularly when we talk about criminalized survivors, particularly women of color,
Mhm.
women from impoverished communities, former foster youth, people whose society has ignored or forgotten or neglected already. The systems, the clients that I serve, the systems have repeatedly failed them their entire lives. Like I said, Sarah's story is really unique because she didn't have that background, but the vast majority of my clients did. And they don't have a voice in our society.
Yeah. So the pandemic hit and you saw this shift in the funding landscape. What did it mean for your organization?
So we started to see the impacts of it by 2023, I would say. 2021, 2020 through 2022, we really were able to, be okay because of all the government funding. There was a lot of foundations that stepped up and offered emergency funding, and we were really nimble. So we developed programs that were specifically tailored at helping survivors through the pandemic. And so that shift in our work, shifting to the greatest need of our clients. We did a lot of domestic violence restraining orders, which DV, as many of you I'm sure know, there's a huge uptick in DV during the pandemic, and we definitely saw that. We had custody issues with our clients. So we had adapted to meet that need in the moment, and we had funding that came alongside us to allow us to do that work. But then all of that kind of dried up, and it wasn't replaced by all of the funding. We had significant county funding that went away and never came back. And that was just kind of shifting resources within the county and kind of other funding streams. We had donors who had shifted priorities, like major donors who, one donor went from human trafficking to animal rights became his issue, and he stopped funding us. And then another donor moved out of San Diego during the pandemic and didn't want to fund a San Diego cause. And those were two like really significant donors that we lost. That I don't know that it necessarily had to do with the pandemic, other than like, maybe the person who moved out of state, it had to do with the pandemic, but it really was just like donor priorities shift. And if you have a major donor who funds you for several years and then decides they don't want to fund you anymore, or changes or stop, whatever the case may be, that's each one is significant, and all three combined, the county funding and those two major donors, left a huge gap for us. And so we really had to contract. We had to lay off staff, which was one of the most painful things that I've ever had to do. We then furloughed other staff. So like we did, a 4-day work week and had furloughed people for, basically like one day off, but like one unpaid day off. And, and then we lost staff because of that. The staff that was there saw the writing on the wall and started leaving because they were very scared. They didn't know what was going to happen. They felt like the floor was falling underneath them. And so we lost a lot of people during that time. And uh, it just was a huge, challenging time.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I imagine that it was like, an incredibly, again, like emotional and stressful time for you as a leader who's already working in a stressful space, like working with trauma survivors. So like, you know, what is the emotional toll of all that, and how do you take care of yourself?
That was one of the most challenging times in terms of my own like mental health and well-being that I've probably ever had. I went into a really, really deep burnout. Like I starting in 2020, like the moment the pandemic hit, I was working literally nonstop. Like I was working from home, and I kind of just would wake up in the morning, go to my desk, and not stop until I went to bed for 2 years straight. And then that's 20 to 22. And then 23, we have all these funding challenges, and obviously all the challenges that our clients face during this time, our staff face during this time, like all those things layered on top of each other. It's a lot of weight to carry. And then knowing that I felt that, these people being our staff and their families were relying on me to raise the money so that they could stay employed. And it wasn't just about, keeping our clients cared for, it's about our staff too. And I care very deeply about our staff. And so that was a lot of weight to carry. I was in a really, really difficult place. And a lot of things happened that I really had to pull myself out of it. And there's also this concept, or not concept, but a term called vicarious trauma, which is that, when you work with trauma survivors, your body does not know the difference between your trauma and other people's trauma. And so you experience what are essentially symptoms of PTSD by working with trauma. And I know that the women in the collective, many of us have talked about this, many of us have experienced vicarious trauma, and it's a really serious mental health condition that, especially, really anybody working with trauma survivors can and will experience, whether it's doctors or EMTs or, psychologists. Like literally, anybody working with trauma survivors. So I had all those things, like the stress and the burnout and the vicarious trauma all at once. And so it took me about, I would say, between 6 months and a year to really, really fight my way out of it. And, a number of things happened. My wife and I bought a cabin in the mountains and we moved to the mountains. And that was one of the best things, living in nature, being outside of a city and being completely immersed in, like, we live literally, our cabin's in the middle of the forest. So it's really incredible. That, thank you. That combined with, we did a health and wellness challenge, and that forced me to focus on what I was eating, what I was putting in my body, exercising every day, not drinking alcohol. Those things made a huge difference in my well-being. And then one of the other things I did a lot of other things, but one thing I always like to share because it really made a difference for me is music is a big thing for me. I absolutely love music. It's how I process my emotions. And I made a playlist that's called Rise and Shine. And it just is like happy songs to start your day. It's like songs about sunshine. It's a beautiful day. Today's a great day. Like an entire playlist of this. And I would do an hour of yoga every morning to that playlist. And starting my day with just this like pause, like I really was in a negative spiral head, like in terms of my own kind of, my own thoughts, and your thoughts control your reality. And, we know so much about like, being able to, how your mindset, everything like that, that makes a huge difference. And I just couldn't get out of that spiral. And all these things combined really helped me get into a better place. And I also have an incredibly supportive wife who was an amazing rock and support system, and also is my accountability partner. And we hold each other accountable for our own self-care. And so, she made sure that I did the things that I needed to do to take care of myself.
That's awesome. I too have an anthem, and if other people on this call do not have an anthem that picks you up, you need to go and find one because it really makes a difference. So you fought your way out of here, out of this darkness personally, but and I know you had to fight an uphill battle for your organization as well, because despite all those challenges that you were seeing, you are absolutely committed to this issue. You're committed to carrying this work forward. So how did you do that? What does that look like?
Yeah. So in early, gosh, it's all kind of a blur now, early 2023, kind of still deep into the throes of all of this, I approached my board and I said, I think we really need to think about merging with another organization. I just felt like, given the funding cuts that we had, we just couldn't sustain the work on our own. And, my initial thought process in the moment, which I can tell you, 2 years later, I actually feel like I was wrong about. And, we learn so much as we go. And this is just one of those lessons that I thought, if we joined forces with a larger organization that had already had a built-in, kind of infrastructure, meaning like it takes a lot to run a nonprofit in terms of the back end business side of a nonprofit. You need payroll, accounting, bookkeeping, You need staff for fundraising, you need staff to oversee all of the, business side of the organization. And I thought, well, if there's another organization that already has all those things in place, then we could focus all of our funds on, like, put all of our donor dollars towards mission fulfillment. And so we started exploring that. We ended up finding a partner, joining with them, and we actually, fast forward 2 years, we just a couple weeks ago closed this deal where it's not technically a merger. We basically gave them our funding and our program, and they're taking over the work. But the lesson that I learned a lot of lessons throughout these last couple of years and all these years. But when we finally got to the point in this deal of going through the numbers of like, okay, we're giving you this much money. Because we did have, we had reserves, we had a significant amount of money, even though, all things considered, like, we were whatever. So when we looked at their budget for how they would use the funds, they still had all the same overhead. And in fact, they had more than we did because they're a larger organization. They have a massive office space. Like, we were completely remote, so we had no physical location, which actually kept us pretty lean. And so, it was something that we didn't get to that point until way too far down the line to realize that that wasn't, the calculation was completely wrong. It doesn't mean it wasn't the right decision to go forward, but it just, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah. And just so that everyone knows, what's the name of the new organization who's carrying forward the work?
San Diego Volunteer Lawyer Program.
Great. And now what about you? How are you, Jamie, spending your time still in this issue area?
So I had a lot of time to do soul searching during this process and decide what I wanted to do next and how I would move forward. And I really, I realized, so when I was in this deep burnout, I was like, I can't keep going. I don't want to do this anymore. And that's when, one of the major red flags for burnout is when you don't even get the joy out of your work that you used to. And that's where I was at. I was just like, I'm done. I don't want to do it anymore. And then I knew in that moment that I needed to get out of burnout before I could determine if I was done for good or if I just needed to recover from the burnout. And the answer was that I needed to recover from the burnout, that I did not want to run the organization anymore. But I did still want to stay in this work in some way. So I knew I needed to do it differently in a way that was more sustainable for me, both financially, and sustainable, in terms of my own mental health and kind of control over my life. And so I decided to start a consulting firm, and one of the really cool things about this transition, I I actually think transitions are an amazing time to, pause and reevaluate your life and, kind of decide what direction you want to go. And I feel like there's, only so many points in your life where you really do that, where you really kind of stop and think about your life. And so in that transition, I really started with my values. And as opposed to being like, oh, what do I want to do next? I was like, how do I want my life to look? And I realized that I really value, like, I love being at my cabin. I love working from home. I don't want to work in an office. My wife and I travel a lot. I want to be able to work from anywhere. And so that really limits my job opportunities. But I had a lot of clarity around, what I was looking for. And it really had to do with lifestyle more so than the type of job that I had. But then once I decided I still wanted to stay in this work, I'm like, okay, well, what would that look like? And before I had even a glimpse of an idea of what that would look like, I started getting opportunities that were coming to me for expert witness work in cases involving trafficking survivors. And so what that involves is that in a criminal case where somebody is being prosecuted for a crime who happens to be a victim of trafficking or domestic violence, now actually this is a very full circle moment because of the policy work that we did, and changed the laws to make that relevant in a case. Now lawyers, if they identify that their client's a victim, they need somebody to come in and educate the prosecution, the court, and the jury about human trafficking or domestic violence. And so lawyers were reaching out to me saying, hey, do you know any human trafficking experts? And I had to, like, suppress the imposter syndrome and be like, I'm a human trafficking expert. I can do that. And so I took a couple cases and was like, oh, this is really interesting. It's, I get to take everything that I've learned about human trafficking over the last decade and help survivors in a different way. I can go upstream. So as opposed to helping them, years later after they've already gone through the criminal system and suffered all the harms that come along with that, I can help them in their active case. And they're not my client, which is really, really nice that, lawyers have a lot of ethical duties. You have a lot of pressure. I mean, these are people's lives that are, at stake in any of these cases. And so, being able to support their lawyers, but not have everything that comes along with being their attorney is quite great. So after, kind of taking more cases, I decided to start a consulting practice, and a large part of my practice is expert witness work in cases involving survivors, and then also training and education around human trafficking and trauma, and working with trauma survivors as an attorney, and then supporting nonprofits and law firms and organizations working with survivors. So the organization that took over our work is now one of my consulting clients.
Amazing. I had a quick question come in before I ask you a couple more that what when you talked about what Free to Thrive did and now what the San Diego lawyers, I can't even remember the full name, are like, those are wraparound legal services. Is there a component where they're connecting survivors with other social services, healthcare? Like, is that a piece of it as well?
Yes, it absolutely is. And that's actually the piece that we really built out during the pandemic, because our clients had so many non-legal needs that we developed a really robust like resource referral program where we would help find like whatever kind of need our clients had, would help them find the right organization or services to support them. And so that was continued to be a part of our work through the end. SDVOP doesn't necessarily have that component, but they are like a, kind of a legal aid type organization. So they have a whole breadth of legal services. So our clients will still have access to all the legal services they have, and they're building the community partnerships. Like, we're making sure that our community partners continue to be partners with them so that they will have access to all those wraparound services as well.
Right. And there's a burning question based on your example that kicked us off about
Yep.
Sarah. Did
Yep.
Sarah, and I mean, you said that you vacated her her charges. Did she get a job?
Oh yes, she did.
Okay, good.
She did get a job. She graduated from college, and
Okay,
she's
good.
doing really well.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. She's free to thrive.
Exactly. Exactly.
Are you still doing policy work in your current like being?
I am, and I actually see a question that's related to that, so I can answer that too. So yes, I am. That's one piece of the work that I was doing with Free to Thrive, that this new organization, at least right now, isn't going to carry forward. I think they're just really busy on the direct services side, which is fine. But I am still engaged in the policy work, and it's one thing that I'm doing that there is no compensation for, and I'm okay with that because it's just so impactful that it's really important to me to continue it. So we have continued so I say we have a statewide coalition of other organizations that advocate for criminalized survivors. And we've been working, like 2021, that bill was our first year. We've continued all these years actively doing policy work. And we have a bill this year that I just returned from Sacramento. I was lobbying last week in Sacramento for that would expand both the affirmative defense and the vacatur law to all crimes. Right now, you can only clear your record. You can only use this defense in nonviolent cases. And a lot of the cases, especially the cases I'm seeing now as an expert witness, are actually considered violent crimes, which means they're not eligible under these laws for this relief. And so we're kind of drawing an arbitrary line between survivors who we treat as victims and survivors who we treat as criminals based on the type of crime that they committed, which really is unfair. And so we have a bill right now that would expand those laws to all crimes. There definitely is a need for better laws, to Carrie's question. So nationally, when I started this work, when I first learned about vacatur, 11 states had vacatur laws, and New York was one of those states. Now all states but two, we're down to two. We've done like advocates around the country have been lobbying for these laws, and now almost all states have them, but many of them are very, very limited, or just there's things about them that need to be improved. And so advocates have continued to go back, just like we have in California, to improve the law. So New York New York's law was just covered prostitution originally, and now it covers all crimes, I believe. And New York also passed another law that allows domestic violence survivors to be resentenced. And there's language in there that includes trafficking survivors. So meaning if they're currently serving a prison term, that they can actually get a shorter sentence. And we use that as a model for the law that I was talking about that we passed in 2021. And so states around the country continue to advocate to expand these laws. And then there actually is no federal equivalent. So if you have state charges in California and they're nonviolent charges, you can clear them, but there's nothing that a lawyer can do to help you with federal charges. And there's been a federal vacatur bill that has been brought in Congress more times than I can count. It got very far last year, and right before it basically just didn't make it through in time for the end of the last session of Congress, and it's been reintroduced and is moving its way through. If I remember correctly, I think it's passed the House, or it's likely to pass the House, and it needs to go through Senate Judiciary. That's kind of the next place. So Grassley, if you all are familiar with Senator Grassley and Senate Judiciary Committee, that is a really, really critical place for this current bill.
I'm sort of curious,
Senate,
if
yeah.
48 of the 50 states, right, if this is like so widespread at the state level, like
Mhm.
what is holding this up from being a national or federal? I mean, is it partisan? I mean, like this, I mean, it doesn't feel like
It's
a partisan issue. It's just it feels
it's
like
so it's so fascinating because when you look at the landscape nationally, it's very confusing. It doesn't actually make any sense. So like when I was lobbying in Sacramento, I was talking about how the states that have more expansive laws than California, states like Georgia, Tennessee, Wisconsin, Wyoming, South Carolina, like predominantly red states have laws that cover all crimes and all survivors. And not only that, but they passed unanimously with bipartisan support. So if these states can do it, like there's no reason why a state like California cannot, except for that the messaging around this topic, both in California and also, in response to the federal bill, is always comes from prosecution and law enforcement. And they lobbied against us last week. And they basically said you're letting rapists and murderers out of jail and prison. Criminals are going to run free because of this law, which is absolutely not true. It is a very, very tough law to use. Just because it's on the books does not mean that everybody gets to use it, right? You have to be able to establish that you're a victim and that it's connected to the crime. And it's not an easy, most people don't have documentation of their victimization. So it's really hard to have the evidence you need to establish this. So yeah, that's the pushback that we get. And it's been our pushback every time we've lobbied for this type of legislation, and it continues to be the barrier.
well, you're gonna have to, when we get to the end of this, you're gonna have to let us know like how we can support that national advocacy
Mhm.
campaign, because it
Yeah.
feels like it should be a no-brainer. But
Mhm.
so you obviously it's been such a significant transition, which I know is just winding up. I'm sort of
Mhm.
wondering like what you learned from it. What were your big takeaways?
I think the biggest thing that I learned is to believe in myself. In the midst of everything, I lost faith in myself. I didn't think I could do it. When we got to this point where we were, losing staff, we didn't have enough money to, meet our budget. I just kind of lost belief in myself as a leader. And fast forward, so, you know, towards the third quarter of 2023, I had hired new staff that was doing amazing. Our morale was up. Everybody was working really well together. Everything was going great internally within the organization. I also raised $1 million that year, which was insane. So in a year that I was like, I don't know if we're gonna meet our budget, I raised $1 million and we did meet our budget, and we also got a federal grant and we're financially stable and solvent, and we were kind of on solid ground. And by the time we got to that point, we had already started the process with this other organization, and we were too far down the road to turn around. And that was a tough pill to swallow for me personally. But I realized that like I just didn't believe in myself. I didn't think I could do it. I didn't know how, I didn't see the path forward. I didn't know how, how to move forward. And I just was like, I just didn't believe in myself. And then I actually did it. And I was like, well, if I just had believed in myself, then, um, you know, we were going to be okay. So that was an important lesson. And, it's also like, I heard on a podcast recently and it stuck with me is like, if you're trying to solve a problem and you're looking at, you know, option A and option B, wait till you get to option D. Like, what haven't you thought of? What's a different way of solving this problem? Like, there's always more answers than you think of, and you just have to think differently and dig deeper and also give yourself the space to think on a deeper level. And I feel like if you're in survival mode, you just can't do that. You're not physically capable of that. And that's where I was. So I have to be compassionate with myself in that moment. I just don't think I could get to option D. But um yeah, I think going forward really in how I'm approaching problem solving is reminding myself to, wait till I get to option D before I decide what I'm gonna do.
Not to beat yourself up so much because, life is full of these decisions and choices that don't have a right or wrong answer and don't have
Mhm.
an obvious path. And you still figured out a path. And this
Yeah.
work is still happening and it's still thriving. And I'm a big don't look back kind of person
Mhm.
because both what you created has found a home and you as a person have found a way to continue to support this work in a way that is healthier. So,
Thank you.
even though it could have stayed, it still might not have been the right thing,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
no looking back.
I appreciate that. And it's true. And the kind of the third lesson that's related to that is that in this process of the kind of unwinding and the winding down of Free to Thrive, I had to separate my identity from Free to Thrive. I really was full. I mean, as a founder, it becomes your baby. It becomes like who you are. My name became synonymous with Free to Thrive, Jamie Beck, Free to Thrive. And I was so intertwined in my own identity that, I think that, I couldn't separate myself and I kind of had to in this process. And that was really important. And I realized that like, regardless of, how I felt about this transition for the organization, I know this is the best thing for me personally. Like as much as I do believe I'm capable of the job, I don't really want the job anymore. And I'm really, really happy with my new job and my new work. And I only could get there if I separated what I thought was best for me versus what I thought was best for the organization.
And to be proud of your legacy because your legacy carries forward, right? And these laws carry forward and the impact that you have on other states who look at the laws of California. So it's we're all part of a bigger um, initiative. And I see that we have a policy question come in.
Mm.
If there is is it possible to correct expungement law so that information about past convictions could not be accessible?
A really good question. I mentioned that the pendulum is, in terms of criminal justice reform, has swung from being like a moment of, demand for reform to major pushback on reform. In this moment, I think that would be really difficult. Kind of everything that looks or feels like criminal justice reform is really struggling. I don't know if our bill is going to make it this year. So I don't know that, at least in California, I obviously don't know the landscape around the country, but it seems to be a national trend, if that would fly. And it's so ridiculous because the criminal, I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about the criminal system and like all the problems with it, but like it's not it's not designed to actually support victims of crime. It's not designed to rehabilitate people. It's designed to punish people. And it doesn't just punish them for the time that they're incarcerated, it punishes them for the rest of their lives. And once you have a criminal record, it is impossible to get a job, to get housing. And the reason that there's so much recidivism is not because people are criminals at heart, but they literally cannot do anything else. And more often than not, we're punishing poverty and addiction in our criminal legal system and race. Um, there's a whole lot of things we have to fix in order to fix that. It would be amazing to fix that. It's such an easy, to me, it seems like an easy lift to say, you've served your time, you've repaid your debt to society, you should not bear the burden of that for the rest of your lives. And people who feel otherwise would say, well, the criminals are just going to walk free. And how will we know, like if employers want to know if someone's a criminal, how will they know? And the reality is like they should have the opportunity to prove themselves at any job in the future. But that's not how a lot of people see it.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Our time is coming to a close soon. I have two more questions for you. One, I wanted to ask you about your experience in the collective and particularly how it supported you because you were in it during this whole time of transition. So how was that for you?
It's been amazing. And, having, you know, more than anything, the people that I've met through the collective have become very dear friends. And a lot of folks were going through transition at the same time as me, and having a support system of other nonprofit leaders who were in a similar, we're all going through different things, but kind of in a similar moment in their careers was incredible. And having the support system of the organization in general, the professional development funds were extremely helpful for me as I was, have been navigating this in order to move my career forward and, support me individually. I was able to get coaching. I was able to go to a conference, like all these different things that have helped me so much. The coaching in particular was really helpful throughout this, like helping me navigate this time. And I think part of why I was able to pull the organization out of where we were is because of the coaching that I had. So that has been incredible. And, just meeting these leaders, like every single woman I've met through the collective are so inspiring that, I had these moments of being like, how did I end up among these people? Like, these are all rock stars and I'm here too. And that must mean something. So, it really has been amazing.
Well, scroll up to the chat to the very, very first comment that came in, which was about how inspiring you are.
Wow,
So,
thank
um,
you.
yeah, and don't sell yourself so short. So look, I mean, this is a real tug on the heartstrings kind of issue. I mean, any of us who have daughters, nieces, because I'm assuming it's predominantly women, but daughters, nieces,
Mhm,
grandchildren, best friend, there's such a vulnerable population that we care about. So I think this really
mhm.
tugs on our heartstrings. What can we do to support survivors of human trafficking and or helping to get these laws passed?
Such important questions. So, and thank you all for your lovely comments in the chat. I appreciate it. And speaking of rock stars, I see that Keshet Star is here, who's one of the amazing colleagues that I have from this program, who's now a dear friend. Thanks for coming, Keshet. Um, so, one thing is just support human trafficking organizations in your community. Like I said, they're not getting enough attention. Funding, I mean, right now in this moment, all nonprofits are really struggling with everything that's happening at the federal level, whether they have federal funding or not. Um, it's a really terrible moment to run a nonprofit. And there's a lot to unpack there. Uh, so just support your organizations. There's all different ways to get involved, but there's a ton of great, for everybody who's in New York, there's some incredible organizations doing amazing work in New York that need your help. Um, and then, for the policy work, so at the federal level, there's a federal vacature bill. It's, my understanding is I think it's either going to or Senate Judiciary soon, which means reaching out to, your state senators. I know, um,
Chuck
oh my
Schumer and
gosh,
Christine Gillibrand are our New York.
yeah, Jill O'Brien is one of the authors of this bill, so she's been a champion of this work. So I mean, she doesn't, like, you could still reach out to her office and say you support it, but we really need people to reach out to Republican senators on the Judiciary Committee to express their support, particularly Chairman Grassley, and look for other opportunities. I don't know what else is happening in New York right now legislatively, but I know around the country there are, different bills working their way through the legislature. I know there's a bill in Florida right now because I have a colleague working on it. And obviously the California bill that we're working on. So there's a lot of opportunities to get involved at the policy level.
Jamie, thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you're doing to change lives of individuals and for the work that you're doing to change lives for a community of people who've been surviving these horrific crimes. We really, really appreciate it. And I'm glad you found a way also that now personally suits your needs. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for taking the time to share your story and your wisdom with us and the important work that you do. We're so proud to support your leadership. And like you will see in the chat, we all believe that you're a rock star, and we're so glad you're part of our program. Thank you, Rachel, for leading us through this conversation. We're putting a few links in the chat so you can learn more about Jamie and this work. Please join us at our annual luncheon on May 13th in New York City and sign up for our upcoming Crown Jewel conversations. Our next conversation will feature Kimberly Navode, founder and executive director of Saul's Light Foundation, an organization based in New Orleans, Louisiana, that works on maternal mental health, prematurity, and infant loss. It should be another great conversation. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you soon and wish you a very happy Passover. Chag Sameach.